Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the EU Life Info Days 2024. We are here this afternoon with the Nature and Biodiversity team in Cinea. And we will give you a series of presentations on the calls for proposals for standard action projects under the sub-program Nature and Biodiversity, including also some insights on the policy updates from the European Commission DG Environment. So after this session, we will also invite guests, which is a coordinator of a project, a Nature and Biodiversity project, who will present his project quickly. And we will have, of course, time for questions and answers. And after this Nature and Biodiversity session, we will have 1 hour from 2:30 to 3:30 for all the questions that couldn't be answered before, so including general questions, financial questions, and questions on the other calls. So I would now pass the floor to Laszlo Beksi, head of sector Nature and Biodiversity in Cinea, to moderate this session on the call for proposals for standard action projects under the Nature and Biodiversity sub-program of LIFE. Laszlo, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Eva, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session, and I'm very glad to have you with us. In fact, your interest in our session shows that you would like to do something to improve the state of nature in your country and beyond, even. And I hope that, therefore, that the following two presentations that we will listen to this afternoon will provide you with some useful information to help you design and later on also implement successful standard action project. As was mentioned by Eva, we will start first with the colleagues from DG Environment, who will introduce the priorities of the sub-program together with some policy context. This information relates to Chapter 2 of the core document that we have published last week. And you are, of course, strongly encouraged to carefully read the document, this part and the rest of the document as well. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A session where we will address questions that are triggered by what is being presented, but we also follow up on some questions from yesterday. And then you can get some inspiration from one of the projects in Denmark that works on habitat restoration in favor of amphibians and birds in the context of climate change, Klimabombina. And again, you will have a chance to ask questions to Karsten from the project. And with that short introduction, I give the word to Daniel, who will present the priorities on behalf of the DG Environment. Thank you.
Thanks
Daniel,
a lot.
The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Laszlo. Could we please get up the presentation? From the Biodiversity Directorate in DG Environment, we're here with two people. I myself work for the Ecosystem Health and Natural Capital Unit, which among others works on the invasive alien species regulation. And my colleague Frank Vassen is present as well, that works for the Nature Unit. So we would like to present you a bit on the priority topics and some of the policy context that is relevant for this call. Next slide, please. So we're looking for a smart outcome-based implementation of EU nature and biodiversity legislation or targets of the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030. For that, we look for two areas of intervention: space for nature and safeguarding our species. And we look therefore for the support of the implementation of EU legislation, where we have the EU Birds and Habitats Directives, included in Natura 2000 areas, to support, and the IAS regulation. If in case there will be future legislation adopted, this might be considered as well. And we look to support the targets and objectives of the EU biodiversity strategy up to 2030, including the creation of a trans-European nature network and EU restoration plans. Next slide, please. Here you can see some of the cross-cutting issues and for how to define the priorities. On the top side, you see the EU nature and biodiversity legislation and policy. Plus note, because the biodiversity strategy is a communication, so therefore not legislation, but it is one of the priorities. And we're looking for the intervention areas. So we look at any proposal that falls at least in one of the two areas of intervention and at least that one of the two policy priorities could be financed through a standard action project under life, nature, and biodiversity. So beyond looking at the supportive implementation of both the communication and the legislation highlighted here, please also take into account the space for nature and safeguarding our species measures. And by covering this both, projects could be funded under the nature and biodiversity standard action project calls. Next slide, please. Space for nature. Any project with actions for improving the condition of species and habitats through area-based conservation or restoration measures. And this is quite important. So it needs to be area-based, land or marine, and falls within the eligible scope of the intervention area. Think about restoring or improving natural or semi-natural habitats or species and habitats that are covered by the legislation inside and outside of protected areas. You can also think about projects, creating about additional protected areas or improving the biodiversity focus and contribution of ones that already exist. But also think about creating ecological corridors, other green infrastructure, projects, testing, piloting, new site management approaches, projects that deal with certain pressures and threats. These kind of projects would be falling under the space for nature area of intervention. For the safeguarding of our species, we're looking at projects that are aimed at improving the condition of status of species, or in the case of invasive alien species, reducing their impact. So the opposite, removing or, if possible, in management, reducing their impact for this case. And through any relevant actions that are not per se area-based. So the measures for safeguarding species don't have to be oriented at a single area or area-based. It can be wider as long as it focuses on the protection of species, or in the case of IAS, reducing their impact. Examples of projects might be hard infrastructure works, awareness raising, specific measures focusing on targeting this species. Looking at my own policy area, think about measures piloting, targeting a single group or a single species of IAS, piloting on how you want to target those. Next slide, please. Of course, standard action projects should be smart. They need to be targeted as a specific feature, a species or a habitat type for improvement. So make sure that you make clear in your proposal what you're targeting. It needs to be measurable. We need to have indicators of progress. So what are you going to achieve? How are you going to measure it? And what would be an improvement? Assignable. Who is going to do it? Who will be your partners? And who will be working with you? It needs to be realistic. So don't promise things you cannot deliver. And tell us when you can expect the results, because we need to know as well when are the actions taking place and what would be the time the results can be achieved.
It seems that Daniel is frozen, maybe he has connection issues. Can maybe Frank step in? Frank?
Yes, can you hear me?
Sorry, but apparently Daniel has
Yes, we hear you,
technical issues.
Frank.
Yes, we hear you well. Yes.
Okay, then I will take over. Sorry for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think Daniel was about to say what it means to have a smart project, specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-related. So any action should be described in terms of duration and moment in the project. Yeah, I mean, these are kind of common sense requirements, but I think it's good to remind them. Can we go to the next slide, please? And in fact, the more specific the project is, the better it will allow us to understand what it is about, what it is doing, what are its conservation priorities, and whether it all makes sense. And in fact, our priorities are actually those habitats and species that are in the worst conservation status, which are those that show in the reporting information from the member states a negative trend, and which are assessed as in a worst conservation status. That is, those species that are reported as U2 minus, so unfavorable bad conservation status with a declining trend, both at the national and the EU biogeographical region level. So this is this information you can find in the reporting on conservation status by your member state. But I think in the guidance document for life there is also a link to a tool by the EEA where you can check the conservation status and trends of a species as reported. And for birds, the situation is slightly different. The priority there is given because there is not this assessment of conservation status for birds. There is a red list assessment. We call it the EU-level population assessment, which is following an IUCN extinction risk logic. And the higher the extinction risk, then when the species is classified as endangered or critically endangered, that would, of course, be the highest priority in terms of prioritization of species for life funding. And then we have the special situation for EU outermost regions and overseas countries, which are not covered by this European red listing exercise. Then you have to look at a global red lists. And by the way, it is also keep in mind that life, nature, and biodiversity is not just about species and habitats covered by EU nature legislation, so the Birds and Habitats Directive, but it can also cover species that are in a very bad situation but are not listed when we have evidence that these are, let's say, in a high risk of extinction, and that is then based on the EU level red lists, and we have for quite a number of species groups and also for the habitats EU red lists that do not only cover the species in the directives, but that cover normally all species in a given taxonomic group. Next slide, please. And yes, in fact, another point is the EU co-funding rates, because of course, the higher the co-funding rate, the less own financial contribution you have to provide. And in fact, we have currently under Life, Nature and Biodiversity 3 different co-funding rates. And the basic co-funding rate is the one that you see on the bottom. It's 60%. So you will always be able to ask for at least for 60% of EU co-funding. And then it goes up to 67% that you can ask when you have projects that are targeting both priority and non-priority habitats or species, provided the priority species or habitats represent a clear focus of a project. So that is in all cases where you have a kind of mix of objectives between what is really a priority at the EU level and what is not a priority. And then what is the priority? That is then what is explained above for the 75% co-funding rate. And that is not just the ones that are listed as priorities in the Birds and Habitats Directive, in particular in the Birds Directive. Certain species in Annex 1 and Annex 2 and certain habitats in Annex 1 have a priority status in the directive. So if you have a project exclusively focusing on those. That's 75% co-funding rate. But it's also for bird species that are considered as priority for funding. And we don't have a list of priority species in the directive, but there is a separate list that has been established and which is available online. And I think you will also have access to a link to see which species these are. This is the member states so decide on, let's say, every 10 years on an update of that list. And we have had an update a few years ago. So the current list of species that has priority funding is quite up to date. But then, and this is a novelty under the current life regulation, we can go further, and some of the species that are in the worst conservation status are actually not priority ones, but we know from the conservation status and from the trend that they are actually the highest priorities. And so now it is also possible to focus on species that are not listed as priorities or not considered as priority for funding when it covers bird species, but when their status is particularly bad, unfavorable, bad, or declining. And of course, when it comes to species or habitats not listed in the annexes, then you can use the conservation, the red list status, and when the species or habitat is considered endangered or worse at the EU level in the most up-to-date red list, because there are several versions that are updated over time. When you take the most up-to-date and the species is endangered or worse there or habitat, then it can also apply. You can also apply for 75% funding. And then again, this is similar to what I explained in the previous slide on the overall prioritization. Also, when it comes to the co-funding rate, if a species is in a global IUCN red list, endangered or worse, and it is outside the European Union territory covered by the EU nature legislation, and that is the outermost regions and outermost territories essentially, which is relevant for France, but also for Denmark and the Netherlands, then you can rely on the global IUCN red list status. So this is all the situations where you can ask for 75%, but keep in mind that your project must be fully dedicated to conservation of these species. So there should be no action in the project that is clearly linked to another objective than focusing on let's say on these priority species or habitats. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then there is a regular question because the regulation, the life regulation says that the program should be focusing on demonstration and innovation. But in fact, in reality, for the last 30 years, Life, Nature and Biodiversity has mostly been financing best practice projects because it is not so much about demonstration or innovation, which is very relevant when it comes to environmental technologies, but it's much less relevant for nature conservation or biodiversity conservation. And when we have projects that are best practice projects, so not focusing on anything innovative, this is perfectly eligible and is a good project and will be considered as such. So you don't need to artificially try to find an innovative approach to be sure that your project is eligible. But if you have something really innovative and you will be able to convince the evaluators that there is really something of interest in terms of innovation, you might still get higher points in the assessment. Next slide, please. Yeah, and now we explain a bit the policy priorities. And in fact, you know that our key legislation for nature conservation is the Birds and Habitats directives. So there we normally would prioritize anything that is improvement of conservation status or trends of species and habitats of EU importance. So far, the priorities, in particular, when these are objectives that are listed in the prioritized action frameworks of the member states. Now, in general, so we would rely on the information of a conservation status, on the conservation objectives for Natura 2000 sites when it comes to space for nature. But it is also about species protection, not just about site protection. And there it is very much about reducing the mortality of a species. And you know that there have been many projects in the past that have been focusing on poisoning, illegal killing, bycatch, but also preventing stakeholder conflicts. So a lot of stakeholder communication can also be the focus of a LIFE project if it is really aimed at improving the status of a species. Promoting coexistence with large carnivores or other species that can be causing problems might also be perfectly interesting focus for a LIFE project. Yes, and it is not just about, this is perhaps also interesting to note, we are not just talking about species that are Natura 2000 species, so listed in Annex 1 or 2. It is also about the species that are strictly protected, or even the species of community importance that are listed in Annex 5 of a directive. So which are species which can be legally hunted or exploited, but unfortunately some of them are in a bad conservation status. So if a project would focus on a species listed in Annex 5, and it has actions that are likely to improve its conservation status, then this is also a good project for life, nature, and biodiversity funding. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then the invasive alien species regulation. This would be normally for my colleague to present, but yeah, unfortunately, he seems to have a technical issue. So there is two priorities that are given in relation to invasive alien species. First of all, you probably know that there is a list of invasive alien species that is labeled as of union concern. And that list is updated and extended on a regular basis. So any project that would, let's say, focusing on any of those species would be a priority for LIFE. But there is other invasive alien species that are not listed. And you can also have projects that would tackle those, in particular, when these projects would be useful also to improve the conservation status of other species or habitats that would be considered as priority, either because they are covered by EU nature legislation, the Birds and Habitats Directive, or because they are particularly threatened and recognized as such as either a European or a global red list, as I mentioned before. Next slide. Yeah, and then in addition to the legislation, since 2020, we have a EU biodiversity strategy for 2030, which has set some ambitious targets. And one of the targets is to extend the protected area network beyond the current coverage, so that by 2030, 30% of the EU land and sea area would be under some status of protection, and 10% of the land and sea area would be strictly protected. So any project that would deal with that priority would also be a priority for LIFE funding. And the second big chapter of EU biodiversity is that it's not just enough to protect. We also need we need to restore, we need to revert and restore species and habitats to a previous stage, which means sometimes restoration actions in Natura 2000 sites, restoring degraded or carbon-rich ecosystems such as peatlands and forests. There is also a way to link nature conservation objectives with climate mitigation and adaptation. It's not just about setting aside forests or creating non-intervention areas. It's also about the integration into land use such as forest management, and improving the health and resilience of managed forests is one of the recognized priorities in the biodiversity strategy. Reversing the decline of pollinators, so projects that would work on pollinators might be a priority for funding. Also projects where the focus is to bring back nature to agricultural land. Projects that would focus on green urban areas or restoring peri-urban areas for nature and biodiversity. And then the last topic is a bit specific, measuring and integrating the value of nature. That's a very tricky topic. on which we haven't really had any good proposals in the last years. And it's also very difficult to combine with the other priorities that we mentioned before. So we don't really expect many projects for that priority, but still, if someone has a very good idea, we would invite them to come forward with it and submit a proposal. Next slide. Yeah. So these are some key issues that we want to remind you. Yeah, actually, we have a limited budget. So there will be some competition, and unfortunately, it is likely, as in the previous years, that not all projects will be shortlisted. We will, of course, try to do our best to make sure that even projects that are reserve listed can still be financed, and this has happened several times in the past. But there will be competition, so the projects will really need to be very well designed. We have also, for that reason, decided to restrict a bit the focus of a SAPS on outcome, which means that projects that are really only focusing on communication or even on governance, as was the case in the past, are less of a priority when it comes to the classical SAP for nature and biodiversity. So you really need to focus the project on achieving a conservation outcome on the ground. Then we also had to prioritize, because of a lack of resources, on the species and habitats in the worst conservation status or that are the most threatened, as I mentioned before. So I think by now it should be clear what are the priorities there. But in fact, it means that a project that is really focusing on something that is of a low priority or a species that is not really in a bad conservation status, this could be a reason for not financing a project or for not shortlisting it. And then still we have to make some exceptions from this, because there are always some special cases. And one of these special cases is the situation that we have with large carnivores in Europe. You know that, for example, the wolf is recovering very well. It has a positive trend throughout the European Union. Its status is constantly improving, although we consider it has not yet achieved favorable conservation status. But in such a case, there is a need to work on conflict resolution, or to communicate on let's say on possibilities to mitigate or to reduce damage. So this is a bit of an exception insofar as a project focusing on large carnivores or conflicts with large carnivores and solving these conflicts would be a priority, despite the rather positive trend and improving conservation status of these species. So as I mentioned before, no pure communication awareness raising projects, nor projects focusing on monitoring or inventories. But of course, both communication and monitoring inventories are typically part of a project and are part of so we would, of course, perfectly accept any project actions that would be communication or awareness raising actions, or even monitoring of the outcome of project actions, as if that is part of a coherent package, and if the project would still have as a prime objective to improve the situation on the ground. And otherwise, if it comes to governance and communication, we will also invite stakeholders to look for other types of projects, such as the SNAPs, which are not the scope of the discussion today. And next slide, please. So that's it for the moment. I think we still have some time for questions. I don't know if my colleague is back now. I can't see him anymore in the list of participants. So there seems to be really a technical issue, but I think we can now go to the questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Frank, for your intervention and the summary. Let's see colleagues the question. I invite the audience to please put in a Slido your questions. Indeed, we already have a few. So we could take the first one. I would say this would be for Frank. I hope you can take it. So what specific strategies or approaches can applicants prioritize to demonstrate significant impact and innovation in biodiversity conservation projects, aligning with life's areas of priority?
Well, I think you should not artificially tweak a project to sell it as an innovative project. Or I think it is really important that you design your project as you have it in mind, with a clear objective to be achieved, and not artificially focus on innovation. I think this is really not something that has a very high importance in the, let's say, in the evaluation of life, nature, and biodiversity subs. So I think the question is a bit artificial. How should I design my project to get the highest scoring? That should not be the purpose. The purpose should be, how do I develop the project so that it provides the best value for money and the best conservation benefit? I think that should be the priority, and you will need to convince us that this is the case. Now, if there is a very specific situation, and for whatever reason you really have something innovative in your project that has never been done before, that might, of course, be a reason for higher scoring, but we see this very rarely, and it's really more exceptional under nature and biodiversity. So I would not invite people to, let's say, to artificially try to tweak the project in that sense. It is only when you really have already from the beginning the idea to work on something innovative that you should clearly present that in your proposal.
Thanks, Frank. Colleague, anyone who wants to elaborate on it, or we can go to the next question, which would be, I'm afraid it's also again for Frank. Does it make sense to refer to the EU Nature Restoration Law, which is currently blocked in the EU Council, when submitting an application under the Nature Subprogram?
Well, as you know, the Nature Restoration Law is not adopted for the moment being. There is still some hope, and it is still possible that it will be adopted, let's say, in the coming months. So this is a bit a bet. We don't know what will happen. And so it's a bit tricky to refer to the non-existing legislation in an application. And therefore, I would advise rather not to do it. But keep in mind that many of the objectives, in particular when it comes to nature and biodiversity and species and habitats, that are, let's say, in the nature restoration law, are also covered by the pledges that some of the countries submitted. And I see the question comes from Germany, from Stefan Heitefuß. Hello, Stefan. As you know, Germany has submitted pledges for conservation status improvement, which are quite complete, covering all species and habitats that are in a bad conservation status, and for which either the status should be stabilized or improved. So I think that would be perhaps the better way of, let's say, linking a project to the policy than for the moment being the nature restoration law. Now, of course, if that would change very soon, it would, of course, be very relevant to refer to the law, but I think this is probably something more for the coming years, for the next multi-annual work program, and provided the nature restoration law is adopted.
Thanks a lot, Frank. I hope it's clear to the colleagues there. For the next one, regarding the French overseas territories, as there is no Natura 2000 network there, is there less opportunity to receive financial EU contribution? I'm hesitating between Anita or Danielle. Which one of you would like to address it?
I can start, and then Anita can
Maybe Anita can complement. Okay, go ahead, Daniel.
Of course, link it to the priorities. And there, in the biodiversity strategy, we do have a priority on overseas territories, so take that into mind. Although that also reference to the BEST project, where we have dedicated funding for overseas territories. In the past, projects have been funded, but on focusing on species. So I would not say there is less opportunity to receive funding, but I would recommend to look strategically at what you want to do. We know that especially in overseas territories on the islands, that IAS is a big pressure, and might be a way. So there is ways to go for funding, and projects have been funded in the past. But yeah, think about how to present your project.
Thanks, Daniel. Anita, you want to add something?
Yeah, I can add that it's not really the case. It's not because there are no Natura 2000 sites that the project will receive is less prioritized, because as Frank was presenting earlier, the priority is given also to habitats and species in the global IUCN Red List, as long as habitats and species are in the category endangered or worse. So in these cases, in case of EU outermost regions and overseas countries and territories, priority is given to those higher extinction risk categories. Therefore, these countries, let's say, these territories compete just like all the others. And in particular, when it concerns outermost regions, there is a specific bonus point. A maximum of 2 points is given in case the project is primarily implemented in outermost regions. So the answer is no. The financial contribution is not, there's not less opportunity to receive financial contribution.
I believe the next one would be also for you. And for nature and biodiversity subs, do we have to mention in the proposal if we ask 60% EU contribution or 75% if you think is justified, or is it decided by life without our specific proposition?
Yeah, well, you will see at the end of the Part B application form, there is a specific question asking if you fulfill the conditions set out in the core document in case you request a higher funding rate, 75% or 67%. If you do ask for a higher funding rate, you need to convincingly justify why you would be entitled for such a higher co-financing rate. And when we evaluate your proposal, we decide if you should be granted this higher co-financing rate. If you request the standard 60%, there's no need to justify anything.
Can I just compliment, because reading the question, it almost looks like, do I need to indicate the co-funding rate in the proposal? And I think it's good to mention that if you indicate a low co-funding rate, even though your project would deserve 75%, you cannot go up.
No, of course. Yeah, you need to build your own budget, and at the moment of building your budget in the proposal phase, you need to decide what is the co-financing rate. So automatically, you will not be able to submit without that being done. And of course, yes, indeed, as Frank was saying, if you select 60%, you will not be granted 75 or 67% later, in case you are actually entitled to do so. So be careful when at proposal stage, you set up your budget, you select the correct co-funding rate. It can be the other way around, and you select 75%, but then you're not entitled to it. So we then lower it to 60% in case the project enters the revision phase.
Thank you, Woz. The next question, which is an interesting one, what about species for which there is little or no information in member states reporting because no specific monitoring was done? Can they be included in a proposal, and how will it be prioritized? Perhaps it's for Frank.
Yes, I understand this would be about species that are listed in the annexes of a directive, but for which the report says, well, the conservation status is unknown, or the trend is unknown because we don't have enough information. So actually, yes, I mean, this would in principle preclude the proposal from asking for 75%. But there is one thing I didn't mention before, is that if as soon as you fit one of the conditions for 75% for a given species, let's say, and the project is focusing on that species, then you can apply for 75%. And this could be the case, for example, when the information in the member state reporting is not clear enough, or let's say the status is unknown. But in the European Red List of species, which also covers the species listed in the annexes, the status would be endangered, for example. And there are examples like that. So indeed, there might be situations where you could, let's say, apply even for 75%, and the project would be considered as a priority, even though the status is reported as unknown. But if the status is reported as unknown, and it's the red list says, the European Red List says it's not an endangered species, then it is likely that you cannot apply for higher co-funding. And your project might even be considered as a low priority when let's say when the red list status is really not very worrying.
Thanks so much, Frank. I would skip the next one and go to the one after, for the Space for Nature. Is there any rule for how large portion of a project target area can be located outside Natura 2000? It's a quite recurrent issue that projects work outside, so that's why I think it's quite important. So Silvia, I think you could address this.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So actually there is no specific rule, but there are a lot of rules which are explained in the call document of how activities which are taking place outside Natura 2000 should be implemented. And there is also a lot of rules of how the results from this activity should be sustained in the future. It's very well elaborated in the call document. But typically we have some projects which are implemented outside Natura 2000 sites, which are mainly projects that are targeting species protection, like or addressing threats to species like power lines or retrofitting of power lines, or projects which are targeting large carnivores, species which has a huge ranges. But again, I mean, we should ensure that the money that are invested, money that are coming from the taxpayers, are invested, and the results are sustained in the longer future. So therefore, please, I invite those that are interested in this, have a look in the call document, because it's very well elaborated. I won't go into the details because it's a long list of conditions. But in any case, we are looking for long-term sustainability here.
Indeed. Thanks, Silvia. The next question, which is on the regenerative agriculture-related activities, I'm not sure if this is for our program or should we retain it for the summary.
Maybe I can answer that.
Maybe you could, Frank, if you can.
I think, I mean, this is about, let's say, activities in the project, and such activities can be perfectly financed, but they should have a benefit for species or habitats. So that's the point. You need an outcome in terms of improving the status of a species or a habitat, and then you do whatever is necessary to achieve that. And if what is necessary is regenerative agriculture, then that's a perfectly eligible project. But if the outcome itself is the promotion of regenerative agriculture without any conservation benefit, then this project would not fit nature and biodiversity.
However, if I can add, especially for carbon farming, we do have projects which are not funded by Nature and Biodiversity sub-program, but from the climate program, Life Climate. So if you're interested, you can have a look on the website under the project database, and you might see what kind of projects are funded, especially about the carbon farming.
And probably look at the presentation on the climate colleagues' earlier today.
Indeed.
Yeah. So thank you, both. And the next one is safeguarding. So regarding the safeguarding species, the PowerPoint slide mentions other than area-based. The presenter mentioned that it does not have to be per se area-based. So can or can it not be area-based solutions? I think it's frankly best if you are addressing this.
Yeah, you know, this is a bit of an artificial distinction. On one hand, restoring areas for species and habitats, or sometimes you need to do something else than the area-based measures. So the message there was, for many species, you need to do more than area-based measures, and this would also be perfectly feasible under life, nature, and biodiversity. But it is clear that anything that is area-based and that would help the species is, of course, also important. And it doesn't really, so you're not penalized if you tick the wrong box and say, okay, this is an area-based project or a species-focused project. I think the message was really, normally there is a lot of area-based focus in the actions, but there is also the possibility to go beyond that, in particular when it comes to preventing mortality of protected species.
Thanks, Frank. The next one would be for Daniel, I think. So what about greening big industrial sites, such as port areas? Can this be or considered as a peri-urban area?
Urban greening is a priority on the biodiversity strategy, but of course, taking into consideration as well the benefits for species and protected habitats could be strategic. But in the end, urban greening is one of the priorities under the biodiversity strategy, so could be considered there. But again, you need to link it with the cross-cutting issues as species protecting and safeguarding areas. So think about what is the objective of the greening there and what you want to achieve.
And we shouldn't forget, of course, the polluter pays topic that depends why the greening is needed. So it's yeah, the context has to be carefully assessed. Thanks, Daniel. Got anybody else wants to add on this? No. Then we could go to the next one, which is there a possibility of obtaining 75% funding in case the monitoring report of habitat directive species specifies that there is scarce information for a habitat not listed as priority? Perhaps Frank again?
Actually, it's the same question as slightly different, formulated slightly different one than the one I replied before. So if the species is not listed as a priority species in the annexes, if there is no information on the conservation status that would show that it is a priority for funding because of a very bad status, and if a species is also not considered as endangered in the European Red List, then you cannot ask for 75% funding. But if any of the conditions would be fulfilled, and if it's only one, then you can apply for 75%.
Thanks, Frank. And just a technical comment that the current question answer phase stage is still for the nature and biodiversity only. So if anybody out there has questions on other topics, then please retain them for the closing session where you have 1 hour to ask other questions that relate to the last 2 days overall. Because my colleagues were flagging, there are some additional questions popping up. Going back to ours, we have the one on is finding and contacting owners of the agriculture area for demonstration project a problem during project implementation? Should it be included in the project application, or can it be in an introductory activity? I think maybe Silvia can hopefully, or Anita can address this, but maybe this is a question that you can also ask from the project that will be coming after, because they do work with landowners. But we can try and address it now. Anita.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Laszlo. Well, it is explicitly mentioned in the code document that proof of support is encouraged in case of activities falling partly or completely under the authority of a third party. This, of course, gives higher guarantee that the project is feasible, keeping risks of project failure low. So indeed, we do encourage that you submit proof of support. In addition, under Award 3 quality, we also assess a specific sub-criterion: identification and mobilization of the relevant stakeholders. This means that we check if the relevant stakeholders have been identified and consulted and are involved in the implementation of the activities. This, in fact, should be described by the applicant in Part B, but we also look at commitment letters of key actors without which the project cannot be implemented. So it, of course, also depends on how crucial having explicit interest from stakeholders is for the project design, so at design stage. In fact, for example, when it comes to defining the project area, in this case, the agreement of landowners' participation is important. So yes, to the extent possible, it is good to have, prior to the project start, already a proof of support from landowners in this case.
Aneta, can take the next one, which is about urban district development, biodiversity, nature-based solutions, stormwater management. Which project would you recommend applying for nature biodiversity or climate adaptation subprogram? Maybe Daniel, because it's still linked to urban.
Yeah, we cannot choose for you. In the end, looking at these three stakeholders, it could be either, but in the end, you have to make the choice for which subprogram you're going to apply for, because indeed the context, what are the priorities, the overall plan, where is the weight of the different elements, you have to take a decision where you think it fits best. And it happens indeed that projects could be eligible for multiple subprograms, but in the end, it's up to the applicants to make a choice there.
The next question is about a project that works in ecological corridors between Natura 2000 areas. Would we need to fill out site description for each of the Natura 2000 areas, or for each distinct corridor covering several connected Natura 2000 areas? Maybe Frank?
I think this should be rather for you, because I don't know how the application file is now.
Then I give it to Silvia. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, the logic, yes, thank you very much. If I understand correctly, the question is whether that it's actually you're interested whether you have to fill the description of Natura 2000 areas which will be connected through the corridors. And I would say yes, because like that, during the evaluation also, it will be clear actually these corridors will serve for what, for which species, for example, because if this information is not there, then during the evaluation it will be more difficult to evaluate actually the case and the value of your proposal. So I would say that it might look a bit kind of not out of logic, but actually there is a logic there. So my reply would be yes, you have to fill in the information which Natura 2000 sites will be concerned by the ecological corridors that you are going to work on. And again, here I would invite you to have a look at the criteria in the code document regarding working outside Natura 2000 and the elements that you have to have in order to, again, ensure the sustainability of the interventions that you will do during the implementation of your project. This also should be well covered.
Thanks, Silvia. The next question I think I can take, it's about sharing a link to the document with the list of endangered bird species, which isn't Annex 1. I think it's in the core document, so you should find
I also put it in the chat now.
Yeah, but it's not visible to the colleagues. But in the core document, you have the links to the an overall bird directive and habitat directive pages where you have all the relevant information that we talk about today. So then let's go to the next one, which is about the path. Are you in a very bad position as an applicant if you do not have an updated path agreement in your country, will this affect the possibility of getting a live grant agreement? Frank, maybe with
to my knowledge, every county has submitted a PAF, so that shouldn't be a problem. And the next PAF would be for the next multi-annual financial period, which starts after 27. So for the moment, we have valid PAFs for all member states. We have one exception, that's the Belgian part of the North Sea, but I guess this is not relevant here.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Frank. We only have a couple of minutes left, so we take this next question, if we have still time. Can you give more details? How should be evaluated actions for priorities and non-priorities habitats in order the project to get 67 co-financing? Anita, maybe you can.
Yeah, well, there are no details. There's not a methodology. What is clear is that the project can target both priority and non-priority habitats and species, but there needs to be a clear focus on priority habitats and species. So most of the activities must be designed to explicitly and directly target priority habitats and species, bringing them concrete conservation benefits. So most of them should target priority species.
Thanks, Anita. And probably the last one would be this: the target of more common species. This conservation status, according to the latest update of the EU directives, a list is relatively feasible, but evidence from experts shows is drastically dropping the last few years. Frank, I think it's for you.
Yes, well, I think there is several answers to be given here. The first one is that we have situations where species are really drastically declining. Now, if we have a relatively up-to-date red list, this would be shown in the red list as an endangered species, because the red list assessment is really very much about trends. So even a very common species would be classified as a red listed species when it is, even if it might be common, because the red list assessment is looking at the trend, and then it says, well, the likelihood that the species becomes extinct over time is very high. Now, if we would instead be in the situation where both the red list and the conservation status assessment would conclude that the species is in a good conservation status or not endangered, then it will be more tricky to argue that this would be the case. I think I've never seen this. Theoretically, it's possible that this would happen. But yeah, I think maybe I can't say if the evaluation can make an exception if there would be really very good evidence that such a case would such would be the case. I mean, we've never encountered that, and it would in principle not match the rules for let's say for a priority for live funding or for a high co-funding rate. But I don't know if colleagues want to add something. I think it's a bit of a theoretical question.
Thanks, Frank. If nobody wants to add anything to this, for the last question, it's about the doubt regarding the chances and of a success of efforts in species habitat conservation linked to climate change. In fact, listening to the next project presentation, which is about exactly the habitat restoration with a view to climate change and the foreseen changes in habitat, I think the answer will come from that presentation. So I would, in fact, skip that and give the floor to Karsten. But first of all, I thank you, colleagues, for being here, and let's go to the next step in our session, which is our colleague from Denmark. Karsten, welcome. And I think colleagues are there, are eager to listen to your experiences from a seemingly successful live project and your experiences and what it is about, and anything else you want to share with us. The floor is yours. You have 20 minutes to share it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Laszlo. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present our live project, Live Klima Bombina. We can already go to the next slide. Our subtitle to our project is Live Klima Bombina, New Habitats for Bombina bombina and other amphibians and birds to counteract problems from climate change in coastal areas. And we are running it until 2024. The main project site is we are in Denmark, and the main project site is at a place called Knudshoved Odde, very Danish name, I guess. And this area contains nationally important populations of the Bombina bombina, the fire-bellied toad, and a lot of other very endangered amphibians and reptiles. Next, please. So here you can see the project area. We have 3 project sites. The only one in Denmark, which I'm presenting for you today, is situated in Vordingborg municipality in Knudshoved Odde. And then we also have 2 project sites in Germany, in Schleswig-Holstein, together with our German partners, Stiftung Naturschutz Schleswig-Holstein. Okay, next. So here's a little bit of project facts. It is Vordingborg municipality, where I am employed, which are the project owner. We have 3 partners: the Danish Environmental Protection Agency, Stiftung Naturschutz Schleswig-Holstein, as I mentioned, as our German partner, and then we have a private company called Raw Nature, and then of course we have Rosenfeldt, which is the private estate where the project is situated. They are not partners in the project, but they are what we are working very close together with them to do the project. It is a big estate that owns about 3,000 hectares, and we have a very good cooperation with the only landowner in our project site. It is financed by the LIFE program with 60%. And then with the co-financing by the Danish Environmental Protection Agency with 35%, and then with the rest is financed by the other partners. And we have a budget about just above 5 million euros. Next. Okay, here you can see the Knudshoved Odde project site, which is situated in a long peninsula, you can call it, half peninsula. We have a project site at in total 280 hectares. We have a western part with existing nature and with the existing populations of the bombinas, and we have the primarily project site in the eastern part which contains 180 hectares of arable fields. Okay, next. We have identified some threats to the habitat types and the species in the Natura 2000 areas, and one of the primarily threats is the climate change that will lead to sea level rise, and the fire-bellied toad's main habitats is at risk of being divided into isolated islands. Furthermore, we also see more often we see some high tide events, especially in the winter, and this causes overflooding of the breeding ponds with salt water. So one of the main issues in our project is that we want to create a new population of amphibians on higher ground east of the existing population. Okay, next. And here you can see the problem, fragmentation of the present habitats of the bombina. And the next picture. Here you have a flooding situation where the prime habitat are turned into an island. Yes, we have some overall objectives of the project, which are to achieve favorable conservation status for the fire-bellied toad and 7 other amphibians. We are working with 1 reptile, the sand lizard, 4 bird species, and 9 habitat nature types. So we are going to restore and create a lot of natural hydrology so we can get new breeding ponds for the bombinas. We are also going to we are doing a supplementary breeding program for the amphibians, as well as we are going to create hibernation areas. We are also going to improve and create 9 habitat nature types by converting arable land into habitat nature. Next. And here you can see listed some of the 7 amphibians we are working with. We are also improving existing habitats and creating new habitats and nesting areas for bird species. And that is the avocet, the redback shrike, the pintail, and the Arctic tern. Then we are going to do some predator control, and we are going to fight invasive species. And we are also going to establish close to nature year-round grazing with Galloway cattle and Exmoor ponies. And one of the most important actions in the project is that we are going to, or we have paid the landowner a one-off compensation, so that and putting a nature clause to the area, saying that it cannot go back to agriculture. It will forever be designated for nature and development of habitat nature types. Yes, next. Okay, and now we have will present some of the results from our projects. Here you can see the main project site in 2019. You can see there's a lot of arable fields. And then the next slide, you can see how the area has transformed by restoring the natural hydrology. Up till now, we have established up to 40 new ponds with a surface of 52 hectares, and we have cleaned up 11 existing ponds on a surface about 2.2 hectares. So a lot of new breeding areas for the amphibians and the birds. And the next. Yes, here's a drone shot from the area before we started. And the next. And here's how it looked like for 14 days ago. A lot of nice water for all the amphibians and all the birds. It's unbelievable how much water we are keeping down below the surface in drains and ditches. So we removed all this, and this is the result. Next. And the birds have returned in huge numbers. In 2024, we had a bird count. We had where we monitored 400 breeding pairs in 51 species. Luckily for us, we had 39 breeding pairs of one of the target species, the avocet. And in our application, we promised the commission that we would get 35 breeding pairs. So check on that. And the next picture. Yes, here you can see one of the bird islands we made especially for the avocets. And only a few weeks after they were finished, the first flock landed and had huge breeding success. Next. And also, the amphibians has returned and is already start to colonize the new breeding ponds. Here we have the green toad and the bombina fire-bellied toad below. Yes, the next. Okay, one of the other big actions we have been carrying out in the project area is to convert arable fields to species-rich dry grasslands. And we have got some help and inspiration from our German friends, which has been working with this topic for many years. So, and now you're going to see some of the results. Yes, first of all, we decided that we wanted to produce our own seeds, and this action is the first of its kind in Denmark in this size. But we managed to produce 9,000 kilos of seeding material. And all this we have sown out in more than 100 hectares of formerly arable lands. And it's about 60 to 70 different plant species. Next. We did some mechanical harvesting with the machine you saw before, the harvester. We also did a huge, we also collected a lot of seeds by hand with about 25 characteristic dry grassland species. Some of them you see here. Yes, next please. And this is some pictures from our sowing process. Big areas, big machines. We mix the seeds with sand and sow them out. And here is some pictures of the results just 3 years after we sowed them out. And the next. And again, here comes some before and after pictures. So what we have seen out here at Knudshoved is that in relatively few years, we can transform an agricultural land to a very biodiversity-rich dry grassland with a lot of nice plants and habitats for all the amphibians and the insects and the birds and the reptiles living in the area. Next. Yes, we also did some other smaller actions. We made natural rockology, as we call it. Now we have natural hydrology, and we have also been working with natural rockology, bringing the stones back in the dry grasslands where they belong. We have been working with the turf transplantation from existing dry grassland to the new arable fields. And then we have been doing this breeding program for 4 of our amphibians and for the sand lizard. Yes, next. And then one of the most important things in our project is that we have established this, we call it all-year biodiversity grazing with Galloway cattle and Exmoor ponies. And they play a crucial role to increase the biodiversity. So very important. And here you can see beautiful pictures of how the cows are working in the area. No machines needed here. The cows are making the beautiful open ponds, perfect for the fire-bellied toad or the bombina. Yes, we have, of course, also been doing a lot of networking and exchange of knowledge of the project. When you are in the Life family, you get invited to a lot of very interesting platform meetings and seminars So that's really a nice thing. We have been met by a huge interest for our projects. So we have been having a numerous field trip excursion and seminars with other large estate owners, nature agencies, Danish nature funds, NGOs, municipalities, and politicians. Yes. Next, please. And we were also lucky that in the middle of our project period, we joined a Danish competition between all the municipalities in Denmark about who could be the wildest municipality in Denmark, and we won. So that was very, very nice for our project. And on the pictures you can see a very happy mayor of our municipality, and also the minister of the Danish Environmental Agency, which also visited us, and of course, together with me, they sowed out some natural seeds in the coming new dry grasslands. Yes. Okay. What have we in our municipality achieved from participating in this live project? Well, a lot of things, I would say. Here are some of them. One of the important things is, of course, that we got the opportunity to secure favorable conservation status for the most important species and habitats in a Natura 2000 area of national importance. We succeeded by establishing a flagship project for other landowners and conservationists in Denmark. We got the possibility to complete a project that could not be financed by national schemes or national funds. And of course, we have implemented the municipality's Natura 2000 action plan. We have had an enormous public visibility for the municipality, and it has given us a good basis for joining new live projects and new collaborations nationally and internationally. Actually, we have already landed a new live project, which is kind of similar to this project in the other end of our municipality with another large landowner, which wanted to do the same as in Knudshoved. So this project has given us the opportunity to apply for a new project. Yes, and of course, our employees have had a really important professional upgrading. Yes, and I think maybe the last slide. Okay, some of the lessons we learned and some advices for you out there. When you are writing an application about 200 pages and you have been running a project for 4 years now, you have a lot of lessons learned and advices, but here are some of the things that I think are important for you. First of all, it's important to read the guidelines and the criteria very carefully. It's important to have a clear and focused project. You need to describe a clear relationship between your costs and the threats to your species and habitat types. It's very important to keep focus on the conservation status of the species and habitats you want to work with, not just in your member state, but also at the EU level, since it is an EU fund you are reaching out to. It's important that you pay attention to transnationality, collaboration with different partners, replication activities, and the upscaling potential of the project. It's also important from my point of view that you remove as many uncertainties as possible in your project before you apply. In our case, we had a written agreement with the landowner saying if the Commission would would give us the project, then we could carry it out. So there were no uncertainties about that. So that's important. It's also important to pay attention on how the project contributes to other EU policies. And then my last advice is that you should not lose your hope if you're not getting through with your first application. It's a tough competition, but you will get a really nice feedback from Cinea, which you can use in improving your project in the next time. So I think I just have one more slide saying thank you for listening and good luck with your application. You can follow us on our website, klimabobina.dk, or find us on Facebook. And also, please do reach out to us if you have a project with similar topics or species or habitats. Thank you.
Many thanks, Karsten, for on the one hand keeping the time, and on the other, I just really congratulate to your achievements. It's really impressive what you have done in a relatively short 4 years' time to restore the habitat. The grasslands were completely converted, and the return of the species is really quite impressive overall. Just a quick remark that we still have a bit of chance to, I mean, you are there to post some questions, but I know that we already have some, so questions to Karsten, and then we already have some that we could look at, we received in the meantime. So we could really go through. Obviously, they all will be for Karsten. Can you explain how you manage to work with farmers and local stakeholders, Karsten?
Yes, we were lucky that we only had one farmer, the estate owner, and we have had a good relationship with the owner and made some other projects in many years actually. So it was very easy for us to connect to them and tell them about this new opportunity.
Good.
Yes.
And then the next one would be, it's a very specific one. Have you taken into account modeling predictions for different climate scenarios as basis for designing your project actions? Will your actions be sustainable enough in the medium long term in view of the expected changes?
Yes, we have of course been doing some investigation of the scenarios of the sea level rise, and try to fit in our project to that. As you could see hopefully on some of the pictures, a lot of the new ponds are up in high land, so they will be secured for many years. But we have been doing some modeling, and we also have created some new wetlands and ponds close to the shore, and we haven't been able to secure them. When you are working with natural hydrology, you just have they will be flooded, and we will also have some more brackish areas. But we have a lot of new long-lasting breeding ponds for the amphibians.
Laszlo, we cannot hear you. I think you're still muted, but probably you want
sorry,
to...
yes, indeed. Yeah, so just taking the next question, even though you had your last slide was quite comprehensive in this regard, that would you have any beyond those that you would highlight as an advice to the potential applicants to ensure their success?
Main takeaways. Well, there's a lot of things I mentioned. Most of the most important takeaways. Of course, you need to be very careful when you design your project, and very realistic. Is this possible to achieve these things that we want to achieve? That's one thing. It's also important to know your partners. I would say we have this German partner. We knew them from other projects, but that is important because it can be difficult to have similar actions in two countries if you do not know your partners. It's also important to have an experienced economic assistant in our municipality, and she had experience with live projects before, and that was a big help. So we didn't start from scratch on that. Yes, that could be some of it.
Thank you. Indeed, a good project team, once you run the project, is always essential to have both some technical and administrative aspect to make your life easy. So very specific question then, were other measures taken, and probably it will be the last question we take, were other measures taken on the arable land, removal of nutrient-rich topsoil, etc., before transplanting the diversity dry grassland seeds?
Yes, actually, that was one of our planned action, removal of topsoil. But we had a discussion with the archaeologists, and it's a very rare area in our area with very large large interest, archaeological interest of national importance. So they were not fond of us taking away the topsoil because you had some archaeological findings in the area. So we did not do that, but I think we succeeded anyway.
Thanks a lot. And I mean, just to wrap up on that one, the last one, it's I mean, you have to see, we have had similar question in the previous set of questions, and it depends on where your project will focus on. You have to make up your mind whether you go for the life, nature, or the climate project. But really, that's up to you to decide. And with that, because we are running out of time and we have to switch to the next session, and many thanks, Karsten, and congratulations again to your project. And it's very nice to see that we have achieved, or you and also we have achieved so much with the funding we provided. Thanks a lot to all, and I give the word to Eva.
Yes, thank you, Karsten, for this very nice and colorful presentation, and congratulations for this fantastic project that you showed us. And I hope that it will inspire a lot of future potential applicants for new projects. Thanks also to Laszlo for moderating this session on the calls for nature and biodiversity projects.